Dr. Brenda Nelson was the director of the Mother Emanuel Empowerment Center that was created after the tragedy at the church in 2015. I sat down exclusively with Dr. Nelson for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. Dr. Brenda Nelson, welcome to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity.
Oh, anytime. You're very welcome. Obviously, as we just discussed a second ago off camera, you are the former director of the Mother Emanuel Empowerment Center.
Right.
When you look back to when the center started to right now, what is the biggest difference in your mind?
Well, I'm not sure what's going on right now because my tenure time with the Empowerment Center ended on June 4th, 2018. So I've been involved in other, kind of moving forward. God has opened some other doors. So, I can just speak about the time I've been there because I don't know, have any inkling of what's going on. I just know that, I was tasked with opening the center. So we did that, the grant came in to provide services for family members who were impacted by the tragedy, survivors, and also the congregation that was identified as a survivor because of just the close proximity and all the issues that surrounded that. So we were tasked with getting the center open, making certain it was an inviting place, working with a number of partners around the provision of services. So as far as the Mother Emanuel AME Church, they were responsible for the hiring and having of two positions, which was the project director, and then a person that came on as first sort of an administrative assistant, and later on the title was changed to a program coordinator. And then the other persons that staffed the center were hired by other entities, whether it's Medical University of South Carolina or Department of Mental Health. So it's supposed to have been more so a collaborative effort around meeting the needs in a holistic manner of those victims, that were impacted by the tragedy, and also maybe family, maybe persons in the community who had close friendships, close ties, and even first responders who were the first ones on the scene that night. So during that time, we spent, as far as my role, I spent a lot of time looking at strategies and developing plans for how to engage the congregation. Understanding that in the African American community, and especially in the African American community of faith, when we hear clinical services, when we hear counseling, sort of that's a turnoff when we hear mental health services. So beginning to sort of, trying to package that in a different way, to look at it as resiliency kind of services, to look at it as support, looking at it as strengthening activities. So my job, what I think, primarily I did for the time that I was there was trying to build awareness around the program, trying to engage the congregation, trying to look at even additional partners. And then, of course, one of the things that I did was chair the commemoration committee, looking at activities and events that would pay homage and just remember that legacy of the Emanuel 9 while also celebrating the survivors.
The survivors. Let me back all that up. What are the current issues related to the Empowerment Center right now that you can think of?
I really don't know. I know the grant should be coming to a close, I believe, in next month, September. So that would be the end of the federal funding. Now, what the church will do with the center, I really don't know because I've transitioned from Mariah in May. And of course, prior to that, I was involved in discussions because I'm no longer an employee, of the Empowerment Center.
Empowerment Center. Right. You talk about leading, obviously, Emanuel Church and obviously the Mother Emanuel Empowerment Center in 2018.
Yeah, I led that. Yes, I left the Empowerment Center in 2018, and I transitioned in terms of as a church member in May 2019.
2019. When you think about the Empowerment Center, many people might be saying, "Well, why wasn't this Empowerment Center taken care of, established the day after the tragedy versus a year or two later?"
Right. And that was basically, and that rested with federal funding. Because, of course, the community had to come together and apply for the grant. And that took, time to do that. And then that was a decision of persons beyond this community Department, it was Department of Justice that the grant funds came from, and that's when they made the decision. So it was sort of retroactive, but that's true. You know, that I think that was one of the things, hopefully a lesson learned that can benefit other communities who are having to deal with similar tragedies, and also a lesson learned for the feds who are releasing those funding, that it's the sooner the better. And even if we can get something started and knowing, having the knowledge that they will reimburse, because I think once people have gone through a year or more, initially, you know, immediately right after the crisis, I know for myself, you know, I sought out services and many others did. And so after you've gone through that and you've processed that, you've worked through that, you know, you probably feel that you're pretty, you know, for those who sought services, they probably feel like, okay, you know, I understand it. I know how to cope. I know where to go if I need additional support. And for those who haven't sought the services, by the time when you're a year out, they may feel like, well, I'm good, and I don't need it, so I can just keep moving. So again, that decision rested with the feds and not locally in terms of the startup of the program.
Obviously, we all remember the victims. You know, obviously, in the tragedy that happened 4 years ago. 4 years ago to right now, what is the biggest difference in your mind about this tragedy?
About the tragedy, I think, well, you know, unfortunately for us as a nation, we have seen the continuation. We have seen even an increase in, you know, those types of crimes and those, you know, hate crimes and mass shootings. So I think, you know, we see that nationally. You know, I'm not sure, you know, what question you're asking, whether in terms of locally what we have seen or,
you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, I think, well, locally, I'm sure that people continue to, you know, remember that. You know, our hope, and I think what most of us wanted to experience, and hopefully, you know, we thought we would, is that June 17th and the coming together of the community, the unity was just not for a moment, but this would be a way of life, you know. And I think in some pockets of the community you see that, that we would not let the conversation stop in terms of, you know, looking at racial reconciliation, looking at inclusion, diversity, that those topics and those discussions will continue, sometimes continue on other levels. So I think that just looking at the events of June 17th, and even more than that, that we would never allow this nation and this community to forget the lives, the sacrifices of those 9, and also the courage of those survivors.
The conversation, where should it go now?
The conversation around race and embracing and respect and dignity. I'm not sure. You know, I mean, I feel, of course, it needs to, you know, continue. Someone probably has to take the leadership around that. And of course, I think we have pockets of initiatives. We have the Illumination Project. We have I think it's the Sophia Institute that does the conversations. So sometimes maybe it's looking at how to even coordinate that. I also believe that possibly with the addition of the person that's heading up diversity and inclusion with the city of Charleston, that maybe, you know, out of that office, we'll begin to see some initiatives that keep those discussions going, that, you know, look at how to even work with the school district so we can begin to work with our children very young, to just around the whole issue of diversity, inclusion, respect, and dignity, respecting differences, and understanding that we all bring value to the table. So I think across the community, there are the various components and the various divisions, but as always, somebody has to take the lead. And so maybe it may be the city of Charleston's new person that has been hired to address diversity and inclusion for the city.
Great. You talked about, obviously, being at your home church now, Mount Moriah, and for at least 3 or 4 years, you were at Mother Emanuel. How do you view the AME Church today?
Well, first of all, let me say with the AME Church, I love the AME Church, and I understand with AME churches, AME Zion, CME, all the Methodism, they're connectional churches, you know, so you're looking across the nation, across the world. I love the AME Church. I love what it stands for. I love its history. I love the structure, even though some people may not like the order of worship. I do like the order of worship. I love the, you know, the involvement in world missions, initiatives. But again, that's on the global level. with the with the AME Church. I think sometimes when we get to the local level, there are differences. Even when we look across regions, we can look at certain areas, whether it's the DC, Maryland area, whether it's the New York area, where AME churches look a lot different, whether it's Atlanta, than it might look in South Carolina or North Carolina.
Okay.
But I think in terms of just the connectional church, and again, that's the world, the national church of the AME, I think it has a very rich history. Probably the challenge is, how do you make that history relevant for millennials and your young adult, population and others, in terms of people wanting to be engaged, in the AME Church, be a part of the AME Church, join the AME Church where they would have growth. I just think from years that I've had in ministry, again, you have pockets of growth. I know from just growing up in Charleston, being in Charleston, being away, coming back in Charleston, there are people in the community that have maybe certain stereotypes or biases, so they don't understand the AME Church. So sometimes people don't understand something, they stay away from it. So again, I think for future growth, but that's not a discussion for me to have since I'm not an AME now. That's for leadership to have to look at. How do they begin to grow the churches? Because I know. If we don't begin to grow and you're stagnant, the opposite, if you don't grow, then you eventually die, So it's like looking at in terms of making the church relevant for this current generation and beyond. But again, I have no qualms with the history. It's a rich history, the structure, because I like structure. I just think that sometimes what's happening at the connectional church is not necessarily sometimes driven down to the local church. And it depends on what area you're in.
But then what's not happening at Emanuel Church that's really not flowing with you?
Well, I will say this, and it's something I shared with leadership, so it's not the first time anyone would hear it. And I think I want to preface it by saying these are my perceptions, because sometimes when people hear things, they react and think, oh no, that's not the truth. But we have to recognize that for that person, that's their truth. I would just say that for the 4 years, so much has changed, and that was something that I shared. So much has changed by us as a nation, so much has changed by us as a world, a community, and even churches. Even across the Charleston community, much has changed. I walked into Mother Emanuel, and in fact, I started visiting Mother Emanuel in 2014, and made the decision to join Sunday, March 1st, 2015. Along with my very dear friend, Reverend Payne, Middleton Doctor, because we had been in ministry together for probably 13, 14, 15, 16 years, and made that decision. Made that decision because of, first of all, transitioning from church we thought we would never leave, but again, understanding, as I shared with so many, and the recognition that leadership always sets the tone. And I'm a believer that if I can't flow with the leadership, because I've been blessed to be in ministries where I've worked extremely close with, my pastor and, those who are in leadership. And so I'm of the opinion, this is again my position, if I can't flow with the leadership, then the leadership probably isn't leaving. So I need to look at what my options are. And so again, much has changed in the 4 years across, just even at Mount Moriah, much has changed, because there was one leader, now there's a new leader. And with that, knowing when I walked through the door, working with a pastor, Reverend Clemente Pinckney, who knew me. He already knew me. He knew my work in the school district because I had served as director of community outreach for our former superintendent, Dr. McGinley, and did a lot of work with our legislative delegation. I think the other thing, of course, Reverend Pinckney was aware of. He knew the background and the integrity of the churches, the ministries we were coming out of, because he also shared a very close relationship with Pastor Emeritus Reverend Dr. Augustus C. Robinson Jr. So when we came in, and I say we, Reverend Payne, Doctor, and I came in, he knew the gifts we were bringing, because that was the one thing we said. We didn't come looking for anything. We just came to share spiritual gifts to help with ministry and to look at just helping, knowing that all that was deposited in us, how we can share to even help Mother Emanuel to even grow stronger, to begin to be more impactful, and to be the church that we know God has called it to be in the community. And much has changed. Never in my life would I have imagined joining a church on March 1st, 2015, and being met with the unthinkable on June 17th. As we were building those relationships, as we were talking and planning for ministry, little, that none of us could have anticipated that. So that was the change. But even during our transitions, as Elder Goff came, continued to work closely, even though Elder Goff really did not know me, he just met me. Right. But undoubtedly he saw the gifts and the skill sets in me and allowed me to be really involved in ministry. And also the people at Mother Emanuel have been very embracing, very engaging. And I feel that when you walk through a tragedy or a traumatic event with people, there's a bond that's formed that is not easily and may never be broken. So, I value the relationships that I have with them. They have truly been a blessing. So coming together, working with them receiving my gifts, excited that I was there. And so that continued. And it's with anything, whether it's national leadership, whether it's school districts, whether it's government, when leadership changes, sometimes the roles and the duties and the things that you did and that you were doing, that can change. And I mean, again, that's the decision of the leader. So I just felt like with the 4 years that, I've been in ministry 26 years, and been in very active ministries, and I've been in much larger ministries and always had close relationships, working relationships with my pastor, and also been in churches with what we call strong pastoral care model, and that's sort of a church that I'm drawn to. Yeah. So I just felt like, it was just time to move on, because I know God called me there to accomplish some things, but then I also know in the Word of God, even Jesus tells his disciples, if they don't receive you, you shake the dust off and you move on to the other country. And as God and his sovereignty will have it, that things began to transition around the same time that I would have never thought it would at Mount Moriah. And I knew at Mount Moriah I had been very active in ministry, led a lot of ministries, continued to have very wonderful relationships with those at Mount Moriah, and just was in prayer about it. And I knew that I needed to continue to move forward. And it's been a good move. It's been a great move. Back in ministry, getting ready to be active again in terms of some of the ministries that I helped to implement when I was at Mount Moriah, to be able to move back in that and sort of reignite it and put some re-energy to it. So I'm just excited, with the journey. And as I've shared with people, that even when situations may not have looked good or felt good, that I'm not coming out of the journey bitter, but I'm just so much better and stronger. And just recognizing that everything has a season. Sometimes we might want to think, I may have thought and planned for the season to be longer at Mother Emanuel, but I still believe in the sovereignty of God, that he knows what's best for us. And so when we have done all we can do, then, it's just time to move on. Thank God for the journey. Thank God for the experience, but move on to do, what he's called us to do for such a time as this. And there's just so much to be done in the kingdom.
You talked about being received by Reverend Clemente Pinckney at the time he's alive, and of course Reverend Elder Goff, and I'm pretty sure you got well received by Betty Dees Clark as well.
Right, and she was just there a short time, but we did, but I mean it was very, she was just there like about 5 months. That's but right. During that time, I think that she was able, and she did, because we had conversations where she had been able to identify some of my gifts, and so we did have those kind of discussions.
What kind of conversations did you have with Reverend Manning? How did he receive you? What was your relationship like with him?
I think it was different, and again, difference does not always mean that it's bad. It's just different for me. I have to realize I've been accustomed to certain leadership styles, and some styles I just may not work well with, So I have to look at, again, like I said before, if it's a pastor, if it's a superintendent, if it's a whoever, director, CEO, if that's their style, and then I'm not comfortable with it, then I'm the one that have to begin to look at options. Because if they're not going anywhere, I have to realize they may not go anywhere. So I have to begin to look at what's best for me and what I'm comfortable with. Because again, we have, we all know different leadership styles that people bring. And some of us can work well with certain styles and some of us can't, and so when it comes to ministry, I've just never had that kind of, I think it's just been just a blessing, because I've just been able to flow with all of the pastors that I've had. I've been able to work in ministry, been able to be engaged. So, we always have sometimes we have different experiences, but I just decided that it was, time for me to move on and do what I needed to do.
What was your experience under the leadership of Reverend Manning?
What was my experience?
Yes, ma'am.
It was, like I said again, it was different, and it was not what I was accustomed to. So that is again why I made the decision that though it was a difficult decision because you have the relationship with the people, but the one thing, Quintin, that I realized in ministry, and that's for people in the body of Christ, even as they search church homes, there are two ingredients that are important to make it a success. Success in terms of a successful marriage in a church home. Marrying in terms of the membership and moving forward. It requires that you need to feel good about your relationship with the people. And then you also, whatever member it is, you have to feel good about your relationship with the pastor. Because one without the other will cause you to be ineffective. Even if you go into church and you may have a wonderful relationship with the pastor, but the people aren't receiving you, then it's going to cause you to have a certain level of ineffectiveness, even though you may have a great relationship with the pastor. And the flip side, if you have a great relationship with the people, but then the pastor may not receive you, then it's going to cause you to be ineffective, especially in ministry. So I've just found out that even as I look or I give people guidance about looking for church homes, that's important. That there's a comfort with the people, but then there's also comfort with leadership.
Let me get back to the Empowerment Center. Let me talk to you about the growth of the population of the Empowerment Center. Do you think senior citizens were valued or included in the Empowerment Center as far as its population and its message?
When I was there, only thing I can talk about when I was there. When I was there and we did awareness, kind of building activities, we did open houses.
Sure.
Yeah, it was inclusive. We invited the congregation. I remember one of the last things I did, we planned a church retreat and had what I call, especially for Emanuel, outstanding attendance, and it was across generations.
Sure.
Of course, Emanuel is a congregation with an aging population, where probably majority of the parishioners are, I'm sure, over 55 or maybe even over 60. But even with that, we did the outreach to invite them, to follow up, and to make them know we wanted them at the table for the that we did, for the retreat, and they were there. So, that's from my, in terms of my role there. Now, again, what happened after that, I don't know what happened after that. But I do know that we did that. And then there was a time when we had, when at the Empowerment Center, there were some staff that did some outreach, went over to the times when the senior citizens, of course, the senior citizens group does not represent all the senior citizens at Emanuel. It's a group that, have emerged and evolved and they meet together, but there are many other senior citizens who are not a part of it. So basically, from the general perspective, whatever we did, and again, as a director, what I did, I sought to include everyone that were, all that were members of Emanuel.
I know, obviously, you love God and Jesus Christ, and most of the times when you walk around to most of these churches around here, they have a wooden cross there. Why isn't, in your mind, I'm pretty sure there's not a wooden cross at Emanuel Church anymore?
Oh, I don't know, because when I was there, I left my last official Sunday there was really the end of April. So when I was there was a wooden cross. Now from what I'm hearing, there's another cross that I think was brought in for the commemoration or whatever, but I don't know, because again, I can only speak with honesty, with openness and integrity on the issues that I'm aware of. So there was the cross. That was there. So that would have to be dealt with by someone who understands the history of when the cross was removed and all, because I don't know all that,
You talk about the history of Mother Emanuel AME Church. How do you hope this current pastor and its future leadership will continue to keep that history intact?
I would hope, I think that there's no choice but to keep it intact because it is the history. It cannot be rewritten. That's the history. You can't go back and change that. So honoring that, honoring, the legacy of those that went on before, because all churches have a history,
Right.
and there's nothing you can do with that. And I think, just giving place to that, giving honor to that. And even if a pastor, whoever may be there, that does not honor it, the history is there, the people are there to continue it, to continue to lift up and remember and reflect on the history.
Mhm.
But the history is the history. I mean, that's just like the history of this country, the history of African Americans' arrival. No one can rewrite that, and you're not going to get a chance to redo the textbook and redo the history of the times to, change it.
Change it.
But you would just think that whoever's there, that when they accept, whoever comes, whoever goes, when they accept an appointment there, they're embracing Mother Emanuel for all that it's been and all that it is. And as far as the AME Church denomination is concerned, Mother Emanuel is very much present in the history of the AME Church. So, I mean, that's something that is there.
There.
Uh-huh.
You talk about appointment, and I know that you obviously had a lot of plans and strategies for the Empowerment Center.
Mm-hmm.
How many times were you able to meet with Reverend Manning about the future of the Empowerment Center?
Well, we didn't do, because again, that was my second year, so it wasn't a lot of discussion about the future, because we would have gotten more into discussion with the future this year, based on what my plans would have been. So I think there was some discussion more so with our community advisory board about what it would look like in terms of sustainability. And those were discussions and those were meetings that, Reverend Manning was in attendance to as well. But as far as beginning to really develop a specific vision, and when I say the future beyond grant funding, post-grant, post-OBC grant, there was not a lot of work, because during that time, the work in which most grants should be, the work during the first 2 years is getting the program up, increasing participation, getting people the services and help they need, evaluating the effectiveness of those services. And then as you're getting ready to sunset the grant, just based on my grant experience, I've been working with grants for over 30 years, That's how we've done it. And when you're getting ready to sunset, you begin doing that final year to look at, okay, how do we sunset this and what do we transition this to?
How do you transition the Empowerment Center into something bigger?
I don't know, because I think that has to be a discussion for those who are there. I know that when I left, I'm not sure how it would be, because I don't know what would happen the next year, because what we were trying to do during that year was to be able to grow the participation. Because it's hard to, and again, for those of us who write grants and no grants,
Right.
It's hard to write a grant and request for funding if when you had initial funding that you weren't impactful. You weren't able to reach like a large, groups and numbers of people. You weren't able to serve who you said you were going to serve. So just based on my experience with grants, the first 2 years and even in the third year of the grant, that's what the focus had to be. So you can grow it into something bigger if you have the numbers to support that there is a continued need. And even if there is input from not only the advisory board, but I would think from the staff, from the partners, but even more so from the church, the congregation, input into, okay, well, where do we go from here? You would have to kind of do that sort of brainstorming, strategic planning with all the components, all the partners, and then coming up with a vision, okay, this is what it's going to look like. Because it might not, of course, when you're kind of coming out of the grant season from the 3 years and 4 years after the tragedy, the Empowerment Center may take on its own kind of mission that may be different from the mission of, serving and providing clinical service. It might be more about, how do we lead the conversations in the community around racial reconciliation? What do we do to help our children and young people grow up in an environment where they're more respectful of differences? It might be, how do we outreach and meet more of the needs of people in the community? It may be, do we need to look at having a faith-based counseling center, resource center, support center for people of faith who are dealing with a variety of issues? So a lot, could come forward. But when you're looking at planning for the future and planning for the future, especially something that involves the church congregation, it's important, of course, to have the congregation on board to say what they think is needed. And if they think that nothing is needed, then you might have to say, okay, well, this is what the congregation. But I'm sure at Emanuel, with the thinkers that they have in the congregation, those with so much experience, that they would come up with a plan that probably would definitely meet and serve the needs of the congregation, but also meet and serve the needs of our community.
Were those thinkers and experiencers brought to the table?
I know, like I said, I wasn't there to do the planning for post-grant, so I don't know. But when I remember in the beginning, before the grant started, and that was before Reverend Manning got there, when there were discussions, they had people from MUSC to come, because I was at the church conference meeting, to talk and explain the grant and unpack the grant of what it was, what it wasn't, and what the services would be.
And how much did the grant cost? What was the total of that in your mind?
Oh, the total funding?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh my goodness, I don't know, because they were like, it's understanding it was one grant made to MUSC.
Okay.
And Emanuel was a subcontract.
Okay.
So they got like a certain amount. And right now, I don't even know, can't even recall what exactly that amount was. But it was a certain amount to basically run the Empowerment Center. And then, of course, there were other partners, whether it was the solicitor's office, whether it was victim services, MUSC mental health. So there were a number of multiple other partners that got pockets of monies to do whatever service that they had committed to do or was outlined and written in the grant for them to do.
Did you reach your goal in the 2 to 3 years there?
Well, I was there 2 years, because I came on board in 2016, and then I was left in 2018. I would say some of the goals, I think it was just, there were a lot of challenges to, again, how I'm used to working. So probably did not get as far as I would have liked to see it go, but then there were things beyond my control. And it wasn't like working in the school district or working in, like I directed the group home Department of Juvenile Justice, working in Savannah with the former mayor, Otis Johnson. It wasn't quite like that, where, okay, you're the program director, you're the leader, okay, this is what we need you to get done, so you get it done, and then you report back. So I just think that there were some challenges, and probably even from day one, just maybe how things were structured in terms of the grant. And that doesn't rest maybe with the church, but just even with the person receiving the organization, receiving the grant funding. And I think many times, people start off a grant, you do what you think is going to work. But the secret and the wisdom would be that when you're moving forward and it's not working, then you look at, well, how do we need to make changes in the structure? And, they may feel at the end of the day that's what they did. I'm not sure.
Sure.
But,
And I know, weren't you a member of the church as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been at Mother Emanuel since I joined in 2015. Yeah.
Between 2015 and obviously after the tragedy, how concerned were you about the money that was flowing into that church?
I didn't have a concern with that, because I guess I've always been a strong ministry where there's transparency and accountability. So, if you never had an experience that caused you not to trust, then you don't have that attitude about not trusting. You trust what's been presented before you. So no, I have no concerns about that. The monies were coming in, and I think even with my ministry, we all have different areas that we're called to.
Sure.
My passion is about serving people. It's not about counting money.
Sure.
So that's not, that's probably nothing I would get bogged down into. Because at the end of the day, I always believe that whatever you do, that's why whoever's sitting, wherever they're sitting, whatever's going on, I believe in the word of God that you bring your tithes and offering. And if somebody's mishandling that, they have to answer to that. But, during the time I was there, the first year or more, when it came time to accounting and making decisions about the money, I heard the reports, etc. But again, I don't apologize for it. That's not my finances, not my own finances, my passion, but that's not my passion. Serving, meeting the needs of people, making sure people are treated well, making sure certain that people are getting the word of God and they're growing spiritually and they're growing with each other and there's a united body. That's what my passion is.
Dr. Brenda Nelson, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to Quintin's Pulse.
Thank you so much.